Rachel Gleason is a dynamic poet and performer with a powerful voice that commands hearts and inspires minds. Gleason's work has been commissioned by both local and national organizations. They've spoken at TEDx events and universities, and their coming out story was highlighted on NPR in a series about identity, acceptance, and forgiveness in the LGBT community. In addition to co-hosting the wildly popular spoken word-based nightlife event, The Drunken Retort, they are also the director of education of the Diatribe, a nonprofit organization in Grand Rapids, Michigan, dedicated to uniting and inspiring youth through poetry. Gleason recently performed for Curve Magazine's Virtual Pride Festival along with artists from around the world, and they plan to continue to share their message of empowerment and hope through similarly reimagined events and gatherings. Rachel, you were the first guest who joined us in the first month of our actual in-person gatherings 2 years ago. You were one of the first guests that joined us when we moved to virtual gatherings after COVID. You've been so supportive and such a friend to this community. And we're so grateful. We're so grateful that you are joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm really excited and happy to be here and to have been able to be a part of your community for as long as I have now. It seems like just yesterday was the first time I was able to come out and share space with you all, and hopefully we'll be able to share physical space with each other again soon. So yeah, I really love all of the themes that you all are focusing on this month of hope, peace, and joy. I think all of those are needed right now after this year. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when I started thinking about hope and in sharing about that today. And I want to talk about the role that hope plays in our lives. Before diving into that, though, I wanted to take advantage of this medium as well and kind of see some of your own thoughts. Hope is such an abstract idea, and there are many different ways to define it and think about it. And I was hoping that some of you would engage in the chat or in the comments on Facebook Live and share what hope means to you. If you want to start that statement by saying hope is or hope feels like. But I want to give you all the opportunity to share some of your own definitions of hope, because there are a lot of different definitions out there, and I would love to see different ways that you all view it. So if you want to go ahead and take the time to do that, that would be awesome. As a poet, I always think in metaphors and think about hope in lots of different ways and try and think about it in ways that maybe it hasn't been described before. And one of the ways that I was thinking about it recently is that hope is kind of dangerous. And I mean that in a few different ways. And I think about hope as kind of this balance of risk and reward. It can be a letdown if we don't get the things that we are hoping for. And so there's that element of risk where it's kind of might feel dangerous to hope. A few people commenting here in the chat say, Matthew said, hope is all we have. Hope feels like the spark when the fire has gone out. I love that. I love that, Lex. Thank you. And I also was thinking about hope, not only feeling like a risk or dangerous to ourselves as a risk to take to hope about something, but also that hope can be dangerous to systems that oppress. And in that way, hope can kind of be seen as an act of defiance to dare to imagine a better future. And that's just me kind of being dramatic. I like to be a little bit dramatic when thinking about these abstract ideas. But I also want to talk about how psychologists view hope and how it can actually shape our lives and our futures. So I was recently reading an article by Kristen Weir called Mission Impossible. And she was talking about this Dr. Charles R. Snyder and how his definition of hope is one that most psychologists agree with. And the model has 3 components. So it talks about goals, agency, and pathways. So agency is our ability to shape our lives, the belief that we can make things happen, and the motivation to reach that desired outcome. And I really like this definition of hope, this idea of these 3 elements of goals, agency, and pathways. And for me, agency really is the key word here. And I haven't seen it in a lot of other explanations or models of hope. But I think I'm really drawn to it because of the idea of empowerment, that hope empowers us. That hope isn't just a feeling. It isn't just optimism or wishful thinking, that it's an action in the same way that we talk about love as being an action word, that it's a verb. It isn't just an imagined destination. It's the pathway to that destination. It's what inspires us to take the first step on a path that's not yet carved. And so when I think about my own life and times in my life when I've felt most hopeful or least hopeful, the time that really stands out to me as being both of those times, experiencing them both simultaneously, was when I was, 18 years old. Those of you who have been present at Open Circle when I've talked about my past might know some of this, but I grew up in a very strict and controlling church that many people who have gone there and have left label it a cult, and I don't use the word lightly. And I would agree that that term is accurate for the amount of control and abuse that happened growing up in that space. Every aspect of my life was being decided for me. Any decision that I was trying to make, especially as an 18-year-old, what school I was going to go to, there weren't many options. I could pray about those things and tell our pastors what God had told me, but if they didn't believe that that was where God wanted me, according to what they wanted for my life, they would redirect. So I felt really voiceless in a lot of ways. I felt like a complete lack of agency in my own life. And I was kind of just coming to terms with my sexuality, which was terrifying. I was also, faith was my entire identity. And I was realizing that there were conflicts there that I couldn't come to terms with. I was also being a people pleaser. I still am today, as a huge part of my personality. So I was really at this crossroads and feeling really hopeless. I could see the future laid out for me of what everyone else wanted for me. And I could see elements of happiness being there, but overall, I felt really hopeless. And that was probably the most significant time in my life when I felt the most suicidal. I'm someone who has struggled with mental health pretty much since my teen years. And at that time, being in the church, mental health wasn't something that you could seek help for. It was viewed as a spiritual ailment, as being far away from God were reasons that you were experiencing mental illness. And it was really, really difficult to come to terms with a lot of the things that I was feeling and going through, while also being a young adult and being in love for the first time and realizing that I was queer, like I said, and trying to decide what to do with the rest of my life. And ultimately, I came to the decision that I couldn't fake it for anyone else anymore. I couldn't live my life for others. And I decided to leave the church and to come out, and I lost all of my friends, all of the people that raised me. There was a lot of grief happening at that time. I moved out of my mom's house and into my dad's, which was actually the house I grew up in. And I was on a mattress on the floor and in that house. And I remember just crying myself to sleep at night. I remember reading an email from the person who had been my best friend, who was like a sister to me growing up. And in the email, she said, I can't believe you chose sin over me and over God. And I had so much guilt and was feeling very small and very lonely. But I remember waking up one morning, and it was in January. And I remember walking outside and looking out at the freshly fallen snow in the front yard in Hudsonville, where I had grown up, and the field across from our house, and it was all blanketed in this white snow. And I remember just this overwhelming feeling of possibility, of the world being laid out in front of me for the first time, of having access to the world for the first time, and to experiences that I never would have been able to have if I had stayed in the church. And it was this amazingly hopeful feeling. And for the first time, feeling this freedom of being able to own every decision in my life and every victory and every failure. And I had this really hopeful outlook at the same time that I was experiencing great loss and grief. And I think it was that idea of agency that I suddenly had, and that I suddenly saw that as motivation. I was going to take on the world, that I could do whatever I wanted to do. I could go wherever I wanted to go. And so I want to look a little bit further psychologically about how hope, kind of plays those roles in our lives, and that's what got me through those moments. And another doctor, Dr. G. Allen, John G. Allen, who is a senior staff psychologist at the Menninger Clinic, makes a distinction in that hopefulness is distinct from wishing. Wishing is ubiquitous. It can be a kind of escape from reality, but hope is different because it has to do with facing reality. As I see it, he says, hope is motivation to stay in the game. And I really love this aspect of facing and seeing reality for what it is. Hope sees what is, and it also sees what could be. And I feel like this part is really important, that hope isn't just about toxic positivity or denying hardship that we're going through. It's acknowledging this darkness. It's acknowledging the pain. This year has been incredibly difficult for many of us. It has been full of isolation and divisiveness, uncertainty and loss. And all of those things combined can make for what could very easily be a very hopeless mindset. So I want to think about how we can acknowledge all the bullshit for what it is and not get stuck there. And as I mentioned, as someone who struggles with mental health, namely depression and anxiety, I have to tell you, it's a lot easier said than done for me. And as someone who speaks a lot for a living, who talks a lot about mental health, who works with young people and has created curriculum rooted in spoken word and mental health, it's hard not to feel like a hypocrite sometimes to share views on hopefulness and coming out of these dark places when, I experience these dark places myself fairly often. And one thing that Dr. John G. Allen kind of goes on to talk about is how relationships and social interaction, time and time again, he's seen with his clients and patients how important that social aspect is to having hope. And he said in the same article that I read called Mission Impossible by Kristen Weir, he said that the antithesis of hope is feeling invisible and psychologically alone. So for me, I know I often feel most hopeless at night when I can't sleep. And when my anxiety likes to remind me of all the ways that I've failed and fallen short. I don't know if anyone else experiences that, when your brain is just like, oh, it's time to sleep. How about we think about this? How about we think about that? How about we take this terrible trip down this awful road? And it feels really overwhelming. In those moments, my goals suddenly seem completely unreachable. I deem myself completely incapable, and my fears become louder than reality in that space at night, as when I really experience that. And to quote Stephen King here, Stephen King says, "If a fear cannot be articulated, it cannot be conquered." And I think that's what's so hard for me at night, is this hopeless time at night is when I really feel invisible and in the dark. Like Dr. John Allen mentioned, the antithesis of hope is feeling invisible and psychologically alone. And that's how I feel at night, even though, my partner is asleep next to me. She seems inaccessible. And I'm really just wrapped up in my own head. But as soon as I wake up and I'm able to articulate the struggle, I'm able to pull those thoughts out of my head and shine a light on them. They don't seem so much bigger than me anymore. It often helps when you have someone to talk to and have a sounding board to bounce it off of. And I know this year can be really difficult, especially if you live alone and you're isolating. But I think that for me, writing can also do that trick, that as I write things out, even though, the mental illness and the struggle is very real, I can see how some of the thoughts are not based in reality once I write them down and kind of look at them. So again, I want to give you all the opportunity to comment in the chat or in the comments on Facebook Live. What are some ways that you all have pulled yourself out of hopeless moments? There are many different ways to do that, and I think it might be helpful for all of us to see the ways that others do that as well. As I mentioned, while you're doing that, I'll kind of continue, but as I mentioned, for me, as a poet, that's the beauty that I see in writing, is that it's communication. It's often a solo activity, but there's a social component for it, in it for me. It imagines an audience, even if that audience is just me in the future. So I see writing itself as an act of hope. Physical movement, yes. Thank you, Matt, for sharing that. That's something that I also do as well. Going for a walk or a run and just feeling really grounded with the earth and in your body can be a great way to pull out of your head. And it starts getting other areas of your brain working the same way that writing kind of does. Practicing finding wonder in the mundane. I love that, Lex. And that's something that I do as well, as, you know, a poet, trying to see the beauty and the uniqueness and the wonder in everyday normal things, and getting joy and hope from that. Poetry or psalms, yes, those are all excellent ways to pull out of those moments of hopelessness. And in thinking about writing and writing as an act of hope, it's also something that we tell our diatribe students, that spoken word is often a tool that's used to speak out against injustice, but it can also be used to imagine a better future. And I like the idea of hope as being an unwillingness to accept the current reality. And as I mentioned before, hope can feel like a risk because of the potential for letdown. But hope is more dangerous to the systems that it dares to shatter than it is to our own fragile hearts. And hope is really powerful. And I was reading another article by Catherine Goetsky called "What Scientific Research on Hope Can Teach Us About Resilience." And in that article, she quoted a study from 2013 that was talking about salespeople and how hopeful salespeople reach their quotas more often, and hopeful mortgage brokers process and close more loans. And I was like, okay, a lot of this sounds like a capitalistic mumbo jumbo. But the idea there is what I thought was really cool. And that's that hope influences outcomes. Hope influences outcomes and is very powerful. And I read another quote by a fantasy author, Laini Taylor, and she said, hope can be a powerful force. Maybe there's no actual magic in it, but when you know what you hope for most and hold it like a light within you, you can make things happen, almost like magic. And I love that idea as well. And actually yesterday, while I was scrolling on Facebook, which is not a great way to improve your mental health, especially this year, I think doom scrolling, it can be also seen as the antithesis of hope. But I saw this great interaction that a friend on Facebook shared that she had with her son. They were watching a movie and her son suddenly said, "Mom, can I get one of those gloves that people wear so that birds can land on their arm for Kwanzaa or Christmas?" And his mom said, "Well, you don't have a bird." And he responded, "Yeah, because they don't have anywhere to sit." And I love that. I love that so much. I read it a few times and was laughing and just really, really appreciated it. And I think that when it comes to hope, that sometimes maybe we just need to think about it more like children. That maybe hope means asking for the glove, and maybe it's providing a place for our dreams to land. And I think that's a really cool way to think about that. And a cool way to jump off and look at hope as motivation, hope as action. So I hope that you all will do that as well, that we can all dare to imagine a better future, doing that through writing, however you do that, daring to imagine a better future and seeing ourselves as empowered agents of change that can set goals and create pathways to meet those goals and make the world a better place. And that is all I have to share on hope at the moment, but I think I'm going to be continuing to think about it for a long time. And I hope that I'm saying the word hope all the time, but I truly hope that there are pieces there that you will take from that, and starting the next year, have a hopeful 2021. Thank you so much for having me.